This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's community access radio station Plains FM 96.9 and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
It's time for Emergence News on Plains FM 96.9, citizen-made radio.
Hello and welcome to Emergence News on Christchurch's Plains FM. This program is dedicated to providing a message of hope, a message with the gradual emergence of the New World Teacher, Maitreya. His influence is guiding us out of the present chaotic conditions and reminding humanity that our thinking must turn away from war forever. This will challenge old beliefs and worn-out structures and worn-out systems that are supporting the production of warfare based on economic greed and profits. Whereas Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom are working now more openly to assist us all to strive for unity and cooperation. On this program, we aim to throw a new and revealing light on some of the greatest problems humanity now faces. Great spiritual teachers have come to the world throughout history to enable mankind to take the next evolutionary step. Teachers such as Hercules, Confucius, Krishna, Muhammad, the Buddha, and the Christ. From an ancient body of spiritual teachings handed down from generation to generation, these esoteric teachings are known as the ancient wisdom teachings or the ageless wisdom. If this is the first time that you have heard this program, we hope you enjoy our discussions on these subjects such as God, energies, the Masters of Wisdom, and the emergence of the New World Teacher for the Aquarian Age, Maitreya. On today's program, we examine war and peace, and the pressure under which humanity lives today. In this hour of need, the Christ Maitreya, the head of the spiritual hierarchy, is eager to aid us to establish balance and order, creating well-being and peace. If you are a regular listener, you will be increasingly aware the momentum of change has already been established. Today, my colleague Peter discusses and examines war and its landscape of destruction, loss and pain, and the consequences and impact that we all face as a result. The impact of war on our nations, cities, communities, and our families. Also on today's program, Shafia will take a look at the establishment of peace and how Maitreya's priorities and teachings can implement the changes needed to advise and guide us towards the peace which the people of Earth yearn.
Thank you, Nigel, and welcome back again.
Thank you.
And we'll carry on with our look at the war, which is a bit terrifying, I must say, sometimes. But humanity is actually governed by the fourth ray of harmony through conflict. So war has been the way to resolve conflicts. It's in our makeup, and only growing up do we realise the horrors and futility of war. I remember as a child I used to make wooden guns, as do many boys. But my aunt, who was a peace advocate and used to spout off in Hyde Park, London, was horrified. So to try and civilise me, she bought a real hammer and a saw for me on the condition I gave her the guns. The first thing I made was a battleship. So I must have missed the point completely. But it is built into us, and boys particularly seem to want to have wars, and I don't know whether it's our media that encourages it or quite what it is, but it seems to be inbuilt into boys particularly. By now we know that wars are great money spinners for the arms industry and banks, so the evil ones keep stirring things up. The Napoleonic Wars were financed by the banks, in fact both sides by different branches of the same bank. Churchill had information about the previous German Chancellor that Hitler was financed by two Jewish banks. Today we have a runaway arms industry in America that is funded by the Federal Reserve, which is owned by private banks, so they can create endless wars and destabilise any country they want. What happened to the 120 tonnes of gold in the Benghazi bank that Gaddafi was to use for gold dinar for a new African currency? So I've taken a look at the Master DK in his book, The Rays and the Initiations, through Alice Bailey. Now, he wrote this in 1948. Well, Alice Bailey wrote it in 1948. He inspired her directly from his place in the Himalayas. The fact that the World War, 1918 to 1945, he puts those both together because he says the Treaty of Versailles was actually just, begging for another war.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it was quite unavoidable that the conflict might have been retained upon the mental levels had humanity decided rightly. In other words, it was a war of ideologies, and so it could have actually been worked out at a mental level. The fact also of the inevitability of the return of the Christ in this era and in the relatively immediate future. So he predicted this in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Maitreya himself had said he would come in 1945 at the end of the war. So it was obviously decided then, but it was really because of the fact that we fought the war on the physical plane that the Christ had to return on the physical plane, which is not something I realised, but this is actually the way the law works.
Right, because he's always appeared sort of like overshadowed, hasn't he? Worked from the etheric planes before.
Yes, that's right.
Mm.
And humanity can do nothing but accept that this is the way it is. We decide to fight it out on the issues involved on the physical plane, and so automatically determines the sphere of the Christ's activity. The fourth ray is out of incarnation as far as reincarnating egos or souls of man are concerned. But from another angle, however, it is always active and ever present because it is the ray which governs the fourth kingdom in nature, the human kingdom. At the end of the fourth root race, the Atlantean race of men had a great war which culminated in the Great Flood, to which all parts of the world will testify. The black and the white lodges of adepts were implicated, and the first major fight took place between the demonstrators of evil and the forces of light. The results were inconclusive, with the evidence for defeat to be found on the side of the good. So in other words, the good was down the gurgler a wee bit on this thing, and that's really when the masters withdrew, wasn't it? 98,000 years ago, they withdrew to the high plains, to the high mountains,
and worked from behind the scenes.
Yes, could no longer work out in the outer day world. Yeah,
They had to sort of almost leave us to it,
Yes.
till we're ready. Yeah.
that's right. And of course, at this time, with the Christ emerging, they come back into the world, in the everyday world, and they will be here in physical presence. So this is, it's been a long time actually since that war, at the Atlantean times.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the world was destroyed by water, which is the sign, obviously, of the
Aquarius.
emotional realm, or the emotional feeling nature of which the Atlanteans were to basically work on. In the climaxing war in the immediate past, the mental plane was the focus of the amalgamated forces. And as I said before, it's in reality a clash of ideologies rather than the emotional desire. It therefore involved the three levels of human activity and was fought out on the physical plane. The future is locked in the process of man's thinking and planning. As a man thinketh and decides in his heart, so will the future of humanity prove to be. The whole of human history has been conditioned by the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, but slowly the weight of public opinion will move to the side of spiritual values. Thus the renunciation of materialism and the growth of goodwill, which leads to the cleavage which must be bridged by human effort. So as we move in from the completely just controlled by the energy of the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, and we'll move into the ray 5, which is basically our mental attitudes and things. This will bring in this cleavage, the sort of cleavage that Maitreya talks about.
And we've talked about it lots, haven't we?
Yes, and so it will bring, we can see clearly the side of evil and the side of good. We can see it in the everyday world, can't we? It's sort of happening all around us. And it's interesting that both Germany and Italy in that last war had a fourth ray personality. And, of course, this is the energy of the harmony through conflict. And they were both actually very young nations, although racially Germany and Italy were very old. It's funny, isn't it? But as a race, as a nation, as a national entity, they were young.
Right.
And so this led to young attitudes, I gather.
Young politicians.
Yes, well, looking for material gain, for territory. Italy was trying to get hold of half of Africa, I think, and Germany wanted all of Europe.
And we're seeing it today with America, aren't we, really? I mean, I think Benjamin Creme said they're in their adolescent stage, stomping around and being the bully boys,
Yes.
That sort of, and really, they're the ones promoting war and
that's right,
invading countries.
And that is the trouble, of course. It's all about territory, isn't it? So anyway, that's my take on the war. It's certainly very much a, I've read a lot about Churchill's stuff. In fact, Churchill used to be my hero. I used to read it when I was at high school and in the library, read his diaries and that sort of thing. And but you see the complexity of the problem and the complexity of the man as well. I mean, he was quite happy to encouraging the bombing of London, so take the pressure off the airfield, so save his air force. So you realise the complexity of these sort of problems,
and how you have to have a bigger vision really than just
Yes.
It's not sort of necessarily all right and wrong, is it? You can't sort of label it so much. It has to be.
That's right.
That vision to be able to see that.
Yes, that's right. And you realise that death is the great release really for souls, and it's not such a terrible, tragic thing that we seem to think of it as just on one side of it. There's a deeper significance to it. Thank you.
So, hello, I'm looking at peace, and I'm taking this from a book written in 2007 by Benjamin Creme called The World Teacher for All Humanity. And this actually was a book that we've been giving away because it sort of really gives a real good oversight into what's happening and where we're going. So in this, Benjamin talks about the establishment of peace. And he says, Maitreya's plans are to awaken humanity to the perils before it and show humanity how to avoid self-destruction. Maitreya says it's really very simple for humanity if we could take the first step. Humanity needs above all to establish peace. Without peace, there'll be no future for humanity because we have the nuclear capacity to destroy the world and all life, human and subhuman alike. How do we get peace? That is the essential question. Certainly not using the methods of the American and British governments in recent times, and remember this was written in 2007, when they attack one country after another. That is certainly not going to give peace to the world. It will not even end terrorism in the world. There will never be an end to terrorism until the world itself has changed. Only one thing will create peace and the end of terrorism, the creation of a just world. If there is no justice, there will never be peace. Everybody in the world will die unless we establish justice in the world. There is only one way to establish justice, and that is to share the resources of the world more equitably. It is so simple, and yet we refrain from doing it. Without sharing, there will never be justice. Without justice, there will never be peace. And without peace, there is no future for us. So what do we have to do? The developed nations have to realize that the world's food and resources belong to everyone, are given by divine providence for all peoples of the world, not just the developed nations, who have the money to buy the food and resources. This approach is cavalier, dishonest, greedy, and selfish, and has to change. Otherwise, there is no future for the world. The masters of the spiritual hierarchy have plans for the redistribution of the world's resources, which will be presented as soon as humanity says, "You are right." We believe that the only way is by sharing better the resources. How do we do it? It is simple to do. Probably the most simple thing to do is the first step into sharing. People imagine things in a purely personal way. They say, "Oh my goodness, sharing. Are we going to take my money out of the bank and send it to Indonesia or Africa to people that I do not know?" It is actually very different from that. It will be done at a national and international level. Each nation will be asked to make an inventory of what it has and what it needs, what it produces and what it imports. Then each nation will be asked to make over in trust for the world as a whole into a common pool, that which it has in excess of its needs. Out of that common pool, the needs of all can be met. Will that end terrorism in the world? Probably not at first, but it is the first step into the creation of justice in the world and will create the essential for that correct relation that we call trust. When we create trust, we can do marvels. We can do what is impossible without it. When countries trust each other, they can talk to each other without fear. With the creation of trust through sharing of resources, we can begin to solve all the world's problems one after the other. They become approachable and easily solvable, and the world can be changed very quickly indeed. And with that creation of trust through sharing, we can overcome the situation of today of people who are filled with anger and resentment. They are filled with a sense of injustice, and they see no way for their children to be given a decent life. I think we've really got to sort of understand how engaged we are in commercialism, really, haven't they?
Oh,
The paying, the commodities side of the food and the resources, they've become commodities that we.
But on a practical level, it is entirely possible for us to share the surplus food that some of the developed nations produce and share some of the technology that is surplus to some of the developed nations. So on a practical level, it's possible. It's the will to change that has to happen.
Yes.
And I think a key word you've mentioned is the word trust.
Yeah.
And when you see some nations starting to trust each other, they do. They start talking again.
Yeah.
They start communicating. They start having a conversation again. Look at the Koreans.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Well, quite remarkable. What about, you were talking earlier, Peter, in 1945 after the war. What about the Americans post-1945, trade partners with Germany and Japan?
Yeah.
Still are.
Yeah.
So miracles can happen. We've got to have the political, not just the political will, but we've got to have, you and I we have to have the will. The population, our communities have to have the will to share.
That's what they need is the Marshall Plan, like they did after the Second World War. Something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, there was that moment, that real window of opportunity when Maitreya was going to come forward because the world was really going that way, and then it was just captured again by these darker forces who really made commercialism the king. So I just take a little bit from Maitreya's teachings, and these demonstrate and affirm the interconnectedness of everything in the world. This is the rationale of the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. Recently in the United States, there was an earthquake measuring 4.9 in the east, in an area that is not normally prone to earthquakes. Throughout the Midwestern United States, Kansas and the central states, there have been hundreds of tornadoes, one after the other, for days, leaving paths of destruction 400 miles wide and killing many people. These are called acts of nature, acts of God. But they are in this case the result of the law of karma. The crisis that manifested itself as the SARS infection in China and elsewhere, for example, the epidemics of flu throughout Europe, are the direct result of the fear generated from the crisis conditions set up by the US attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq. It is not a question of God punishing the aggressor. It is a simple law of the interconnectedness of all atoms in the universe. What happens here sets up something that will inevitably happen elsewhere by the law of action and reaction. When humanity truly understands this law, the law of karma, not just as an intellectual idea, it will see that every thought, every action sets into motion a cause or causes. The effects stemming from these causes make our lives for good or ill. And I just think if we really understood that, we'd just act so differently, wouldn't we?
Wow. The self-discipline that's required to control our thoughts, and when a negative thought comes, to not just to catch it, but to change it.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
It takes quite a lot of
Yeah,
work,
we
doesn't
often
it?
just add to it, don't we?
We do. And this is where, Maitreya says about, what is it? Honesty, sincerity of purpose, and detachment are the keys to being able to do that. So, I think it'll be a great sort of. We need Maitreya to tell us about the law of karma and to really understand it. And I think we'll all change a lot better then. That everything we do, we're going to reap the benefits or the.
And speaking of
consequences.
Maitreya, we'll have a look at his words in regard to the blasphemy of war in just a moment.
This is the Emergence News on Plains FM. For more information, go to shareinternational.org.
This is a reading entitled The Blasphemy of War by the Master through Benjamin Creme. Twice last century the world was convulsed by total war, two terrible phases of one war which cost humanity many millions of lives. Each was meant to be the war to end war. But still, there are those who plot and plan for yet another trial of strength, with weapons of even greater destructiveness. How long, we must ask, will it take man to realise that war solves nothing, proves nothing, and adds only pain and loss to the peoples of earth? A major reason for the Master's return to the everyday world is precisely to remind men of this, to so influence their thinking that they turn away from war forever. So many nations today possess the nuclear bomb, the most destructive weapon ever conceived and built, that a future major war would be the ultimate horror, the complete destruction of life on planet Earth. For many millions of years, Earth would become a dead planet, a toxic waste. Men themselves would have to incarnate on some dark, far-off world and begin again the long, long journey into the light. You may be sure that when Maitreya imminently begins his open mission, he will face men with this problem and its outcome and offer his solution and advice. War, he will remind men, is a blasphemy, a detestation and crime against all men, involved or not. War, he will say, must be considered thus if humanity and the lower kingdoms are to survive. Sharing and justice alone, he will say, will ensure the future for men. Strive for unity and cooperation, for the men of earth are one. See your brother as yourself, and take the first step into your divinity. Take your brother's needs and the measure for your action and save the problems of the world. There is no other course. Thus will Maitreya speak to the people of earth. Thus will he endeavour to change the direction of their thinking. Will the people listen and act on his advice? Fear and foreboding fill the minds of men. Ancient habits of thought die hard and are loath to change. More and more, however, the problems and privations which accompany the economic collapse of today encourage men to seek new ways of living and turn their thoughts to sharing, to the creation of a more just and generous world. Thus are many ready to respond to Maitreya's words. Many, of course, are not ready to change. Many are content with the present situation, expecting an upturn in the markets before too long, when they will begin to make again money from air for their company and themselves. Many too in the religious fields will welcome little the appearance of Maitreya. Bereft of knowledge, clinging to their man-made dogmas, they will find in Maitreya, the Lord of Love, the abomination of evil that they fear. But not all. Many religious groups around the world have seen and heard Maitreya's words before, albeit in another guise. They will remember the teacher who appeared to them and planted the seeds of sharing and justice in their minds, while endowing their lands with the waters of life from Aquarius. Eventually, so great will be the pressure for a better, a fairer, and a safer world that even the most bigoted will add their voices to the clamour for change. Thus will it be.
All this information can be found on the Share International website, www.share-international.org. Scorpio Books in Christchurch carries a magazine and some books. And also don't forget the podcasts, which are available on the Plains FM website.
We welcome your comments, questions and feedback. Please contact us at emergencenews@gmail.com.
The opportunity to join our transmission is available Monday and Wednesday evenings and Thursday mornings, which gives us the possibility to do a service meditation in conjunction with Masters.